We always like to start the internet seriously by setting this moment in history so that when you look back at the podcast, you can figure out where we are. I fear today we're going to be mainly talking about men and boys in the context of the things that we're talking about. But let's start by celebrating women. Yesterday, Euro 25, after witnessing a really nail-biting match behind the cushions, the England team have just got through to the Euro finals to face Germany or Spain with a late penalty, not a penalty shootout. It was agony. Welcome to the Internet Seriously, a humorous look at tech, news and politics. I'm Lucian Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Alice Taylor in Oxford.
And today we welcome a very special guest, the BBC's first ever cyber correspondent, a seasoned investigative journalist whose work has garnered millions of views and been translated globally. The author of Control Alt Chaos, How Teenage Hackers Hijack the Internet. Get ready for an illuminating and sometimes unsettling conversation as we welcome the one and only Joe Tidy. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, guys.
Yeah. Hi. So coming up today, we're going to be talking about Joe's book, and between the three of us, we came up with three themes that we'd like to discuss with Joe. The first are questions from Alice and Emily, unpacking victim blame and cruelty in the digital world. Next, addressing the internet's design flaws and the roots of online toxicity. And finally, unpacking the cybercrime paradox, organised transnational gangs versus accessible hacking tools. Joe, this book of yours, here it is. Control Alt Chaos, fantastic. Some of us have read the whole thing, and some of us have got, I gave the intro there, and there's some quite chewy topics there, and we want to keep this light and humorous. But really, when you dig into this is, for us at the Internet Seriously, we deal with security and cyber and hackers and these sorts of things. This is tough stuff. So we'll kick off with Emily, who's got a few. We'll start with some lighter questions.
Well, yeah. The first question really, Joe, is what made you write this book, and why this book, and why now?
So I've been doing this job now for just over a decade. I've been covering cyber, and really it all goes back to the beginning for me, because when I first found out about the world of cyber, it was during a story when I was at Sky News. I was a sort of general correspondent covering anything and everything they threw at me, from politics to home affairs, that kind of thing, foreign affairs, lots of crime as well. But I'd never really covered a cybercrime incident. So when this story about, in 2014 at Christmas time, about Lizard Squad, I don't know if you guys, or you will know now because you read the book.
Yes,
people
and that was the moment for me that the book got incredibly dark. Well, there were lots of dark moments, but the Lizard Squad were very dark, weren't they, in terms of their activity and the impact?
That sparked my obsession with cyber, covering that story way back then. And I've always felt since then there is something really fascinating going on with particularly that individual hacker that is in that runs all the way through the story, this guy called Julius Kivimaki, who was part of Lizard Squad. And I interviewed him in 2014. My first ever cyber story, first ever hacker I'd spoken to. And it blew my mind, the power that they can wield from keyboard and mouse thousands of miles away. And I just I've carried on obviously in my career, but I've always gone back, my mind has always gone back to Julius Kivimaki, what's going on with him. And then of course his name came up 8 years later or 9 years later as being involved in what was for my money, the cruelest cyber attack ever. And I just thought there's something here. There's a story to be told here of not just this one person, but also this culture of teenage hacking and how you get innocent boys turning into delinquents and miscreants on the internet, and then eventually sometimes very serious cybercriminals.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really liked about the way you approached the subject was that you place as much focus on the victims and the impact on them as you do on the perpetrators and the exploits. I often feel in the reporting of cybercrime, we get obsessed with, well, you know, what was the pathway in, what were the vulnerabilities, and that kind of really dehumanizes the whole thing. But actually, the stories about the impact on the victims, the patients in the Vastamo clinic, and for me, you know, the parents of Blair Strater, and you know, the impact that the sort of repeated sort of, whether it's escalation of pizza deliveries to swatting, and how that ruined their lives. I think that, you know, one of the things I'd love your reflection on is, you know, how do we join up the sort of excitement that these young boys clearly feel for the power that they can wield, the agency that they can have in doing stuff, with the consequences of that action, the real human, you know, hurt and losses that they cause.
It's that age-old problem, Emily, and we've done stories together for BBC News. I've called you up and I've asked you for your opinion on things last minute, and you've always been excellent. Thank you for that. But it's, you know, how do we quantify the harm of cyber? It's so difficult, especially when quite often it's companies that have been hit and they want to say nothing, and they want to keep all the details out of the press, and they want it all just to go away. So we do struggle to speak to victims when we do these stories. But I think that was a really important part of the book, because one of the criticisms, which, you know, I hope that I address head on, is should we be giving these boys, now men, attention? Because clearly that is part of the appeal of the teenage hacking, sort of teenage cybercrime culture, is getting attention. So you could argue, why are you writing a book? You know, why are you writing a book about it when it's making it worse? But I think, and I hope, that the book shines a light on what's happening and tells you and explains a bit more about how we got from the good old days of the sort of 80s, 90s, early 2000s of hacking to where we are today, where teenage cybercrime is really quite sinister and nasty.
Thank you very much. So we're going to swing the camera slightly towards the victims, and Alice has a question for you on that.
Yeah, well, you were sort of touching on this, and I'm really interested in why it is you think we tend to blame victims of scams and fraud in a way that's quite similar to how, you know, victims of sexual abuse and rape and domestic violence are blamed. And it's not the case for other crimes like burglary. Why do you think it is, you know, for scams and fraud, why do we blame the victims?
I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think you would blame a victim if it's a company, for example, that leaves a safe open in a bank, or leaves the door open or a window open to let them into a large corporation, and stuff is stolen. I think that you would be a bit critical of that. And I think that's the issue with cyber. The problem is, and I have to constantly remind myself that the victims, they are victims, these corporations that are hit. But at the same time, there are elements of cyber they do track with kind of like physical crime, but also they're also, you know, sort of unique to the nature of it, whereby if you are a victim and you get hacked, quite often you're also meant to be the custodian of data. So, for example, if you take Vastamo, for example, the psychotherapy chain that I talk about a lot in the book, which was hacked and all the patient data was stolen, that company was a victim of crime, because Julius Kivimaki found a way in. He stole all the data, downloaded social security numbers, names, addresses, email addresses, and importantly, of course, and cruelly, the patient notes of all those 33,000 people. So Vastamo was a victim, but also it was meant to be a custodian of data and a custodian of people's personal private property. And it failed drastically and dramatically because it didn't secure the servers. As if you read the book, you know, Kivimaki got in the most routine, humdrum way you could ever imagine. There was no real proper hacking here.
Now you're talking, and you're talking about structural weaknesses, which I do want to come back to, because my background is internet security engineering, and the word open safes is something that I use all the time. So I want to come back and revisit that point. Alice works with vulnerable groups. Her background is NHS, and it's very much down to the sort of individual, the consumer as a victim versus the corporate. And I think there's a big difference. We're talking with your grandmother, Alice, about and the difficulty she has just engaging with the internet in any way at all, and she's completely exposed to anything and it's more of just being a victim of crime rather than a corporate target. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting what you say, Joe, of kind of like, corporate responsibility in the sense of like leaving an open safe. But then, as in the Vestamo case, it's the victims ultimately were the patients whose medical records were leaked to the world. And it's sort of like, I think when I say we blame scam and fraud victims, we use language like fell for a scam, if you click on a phishing link, for example. But obviously it's quite different talking about like the responsibilities of a big company. But why
you worked in the NHS where they asked you to share the same password in the NHS.
Yeah, exactly, for highly confidential patient data.
Just, yeah.
I want to go on to about structural weaknesses in the internet. But before that, it's time for our Tech Room 101. Sorry, this really is live. It's time for our guilty pleasure online. Joe Tidy, I know you got both lined up, but we're starting with your guilty pleasure online.
Sure. Okay, well, I had thought long and hard about this. One of the things that I do more than I should, and the people whose stories I'm reading probably wouldn't want me to. So there's a subreddit. On Reddit, there's a channel called Tattoo Advice, and I absolutely love going on Tattoo Advice. And I've got a pop-up notification whenever a new one pops up, because I got a tattoo here, I think it was a couple of years ago, and it's been a fiasco. I've got it wrong, and I've been trying to get it back multiple times to try and get it fixed and try and make it better, but it's still rubbish.
It's not.
Was it very painful as well?
No, not really, because it's in a kind of like.
When you say a fiasco, is that like how it's turned out, the design, or just like the recovery of the tattoo? What's the fiasco?
Well, I've realised now that I'm like the worst person to get a tattoo ever, because I'm impulsive, but I'm also full of regret. So it's an absolute disaster for me. I got it as my wife and kids, like a kind of like artistic picture. But then it takes one comment from my wife or my friends or whatever to suddenly think, oh yeah, I need to change that. And I've changed it and changed it. Anyway, it's a mess. But I love Tattoo Advice, because I go on there and people post their own pictures of their own bad tattoos. And then all the comments are absolutely hilarious. And I shouldn't, but I laugh a lot reading these comments, because a lot of them are like me, an absolute shambles of regret. So I enjoy that. I suppose that would be my kind of guilty pleasure.
That's amazing. I would never have guessed that.
This wins the prize, doesn't it? We've had all sorts of stuff out there. I mean, there's stuff.
I'm glad you didn't say advertising.
Yeah, I mean, the top three guilty pleasures online are mindless reality TV and celebrity gossip, followed by endless social media scrolling and stalking, niche and nostalgic content rabbit holes, which I think tattoo advice online is nearly that.
Maybe
Yeah,
niche. It's certainly niche.
Is that some sort of survey?
It's actually an AI. What is the top thing? So this is Google Gemini. So it's actually I trust it to some extent, but we're not going to ask you to go and just put a T-shirt on so we can.
Can we see the
promise.
I can't. Luckily, I've got a shirt on.
So next up, we want to talk a bit about culture. And also male cults. Alice has got a question. But first of all, Joe, you talk in your book about the perpetrators, teenage boys, and their victims. And I just wanted to move to the other part of it, which was the internet as a supply chain, which I'm very interested in. we've got a new initiative, which I think I mentioned to you at your book launch, but you were quite busy that day. But it's called the Global Signal Exchange, which is a not-for-profit which has been founded by us and Google, together with the Global Anti-Scam Alliance. We're facilitating the exchange of information related to fraud and scams. And we're getting really good cooperation from some sectors, such as the major platforms, but others, not so much. And I think this sort of toxic culture that you describe amongst teenagers in your book, I recognise in some aspects of the internet supply chain. What's the solution here? Can we rely upon the goodwill and cooperation from these different sectors? And what happens if that doesn't materialise? I think we're all at the mercy of these weak pockets of the internet.
Yeah, I think to answer the first part of your question, I haven't got the answer. It's a massive, massive societal problem that we just haven't got to grips with. There are some initiatives, obviously, that try and get these types of communities on the straight and narrow or closed down. But I think in my book, I talk about how the rise of social platforms has been a factor in making these communities thrive and potentially become more insular, but also become more influential as well. So, for example, I talk about Twitter, which came around in the sort of early 2010s, and it really proved that social networks can be different, because back then, of course, going on one of these platforms was about being social with your network, but Twitter proved that you don't need that, you just need followers, and that means you can do edgelord type activity and get attention, do things that make you infamous, not famous. And then you've got the rise of IRC, then MSN, then Skype, video calls, now Telegram and Discord. These are places that are really quite impenetrable to reporters and to researchers, and in some cases to police, that allow these types of communities to gather, to plan, to flourish. And it's difficult because we've got to be careful, of course, that we don't say that all activity on these platforms and all young people on the internet are causing problems, because they're not. It's a tiny fraction that are. But it has to be said, when we look at the kind of trends, there is an issue with young people, particularly boys, in these communities, causing harassment, causing things like sextortion, and in some cases, serious cybercrime.
Alice, you have a further development on this.
Well, it's funny you sort of saying that about these spaces that are so impenetrable to researchers and the police. We had a story, I think it was last week, about someone who planned a terrorism attack on Roblox, and that, this is just one of many, many examples. But I wanted to kind of connect this to, your book really focuses on almost like the radicalization of teenage boys and young men. And I want to ask you, firstly, what is it that we're getting so wrong societally that makes them feel so safe in these quite cult-like, radicalizing online spaces? And what do you think the solutions are? Because, a lot of what I hear seems to be quite what I'd call a sort of abstinence approach of like banning screen time for children, or, the UK trying to implement a sort of, no social media for under 16s. Do you think that is an effective way of supporting young people with online safety?
Brilliant question. And I think that therein lies the tension. I was asked in a panel recently what the answer could be. What would I do to protect my three boys from falling down these paths? And I did sort of lean on the lazy, but also hard work in reality option, which is keep them offline as long as possible. But then someone else said, well, actually, that's not, it's 2025. We need to find better ways of coping with it that isn't go back to the Middle Ages. We should be able to make platforms and spaces that are safe. And I think, I don't know the answer, but in the final chapter of my book, I went back and I spoke to and asked questions of, lots of the people, experts like cybersecurity experts or police or victims, what could be done. And there was a real kind of mixture of potential answers. I think one of the first things is that social networks should take more accountability for what happens on their platforms. But also, I think parents should perhaps take a bit more responsibility of what their kids are doing in their bedrooms. That's not me saying that. I'm fully aware of the difficulties of.
Well, it really struck me the point you made in your book of, a lawyer saying to you, like, it's actually really classist and such a privileged thing to just be like, well, you should monitor everything that your children do online. And it's like, that's completely unrealistic. That's so difficult for most parents to implement. And it's really interesting. You're sort of saying, like, we don't really know how to fix this.
But yeah, I think the other thing was that we need more education for children to understand that when you harass someone over the internet, when you do a sextortion attack, or when you bully them online, it has a real impact in the real world on the person behind the screen. Likewise, when you hack, steal data, hold someone to ransom, that has consequences for people. And someone in the book, Marko Lepinen, who's a Finnish cybercrime police officer, he made a good point. He said that a lot of these kids, they would never dream of going up to someone and kicking them in the street.
No, right.
That would be their kind of violent crime. But for them, the idea of stealing data or ransoming data or extorting people seems completely normal and fine.
Well, thank you very much. We could talk all night about this. We're coming up to our last two questions for you. We want to talk about the sort of globalization of the hacking industry and also hacking as a service and the tools that are so easily available to everyone. Before we do that, it's our Tech Room 101. Room 101. Joe, I think you've got many things. What have you selected to go in the bin? What from the tech world? What would you put into the bin forever?
I would put in fake adverts on TikTok for games. So they're on TikTok. I was spending time on TikTok. You see these games and they look amazing, and the trailers are brilliant, and the gameplay looks great. And then you go and download the game. It looks nothing like it said.
They've just generated some footage.
Zombie monster charging me down, and I'm meant to gun it down with my little army of people. You download the game. It's completely different.
Yeah, Joe, just check this. Do you like games? You like playing games?
I love them.
I don't know how you have time doing tech. I do tech all day. I'm doing programming and tech and networking. I go home, the last thing I want to do on the planet is plug in a computer.
We were talking about this because
on your little
Alice was doing your checklist
of the people's journey into hacking. It was like, number 1, gamer.
Yes.
That's me, tick. Number 2, online gamer. That's me, tick. Number 3, cheats. That's me, tick. Number 4, modding games. I've done that as well. And then you progress into hacking and criminal hacking. And I'm like, oh my god. And also I know so many people who also tick all these boxes.
Do you do cheats for your games? Do you do the official cheat? I used to be a publisher.
Boring and noble.
There were honest cheats. I used to run a magazine called PlayStation Solutions. This was decades ago, and it was really published sort of backdoors and fast ways of getting up layers and stuff.
But also the game suppliers colluded with it, didn't they? Because they wanted people to play more.
They educated.
I think am I the only? No, you're not a gamer. But I think us two are the only non-gamers in this room at the moment, and you, Joe. As well.
Your thing about TikTok videos made me think of what I hate. Like my Tech Room 101 is when the adverts are of someone playing the game so embarrassingly badly, and it works. It makes me like, no, why would you select 4 orange cubes when you could clearly there's 7 orange cubes over there, and it makes I want to download the game now.
I know exactly the game you're talking about as well.
Emily, the transnational hacking industry.
I wanted to just sort of in our work, Joe, we spend a lot of time at the Global Signal Exchange trying to convince people that cybercriminals are not just lonely boys in bedrooms, but are actually transnational organised gangs. There are awful scam farms, a lot of them in Southeast Asia, for example, where they're holding people hostage, making them scam people all day. So are we wrong? I think you deal with this in the sort of towards the end of the book as well, where you do a timeline of, the boys were really, very in the mid, 10 years ago, and then we got into Russian hackers, and then but you also sort of make the point that the boys are always there, they're just under the radar. So how can you help us understand how all of these things fit together?
Yeah, so I think someone said this the other day. I was at an event and they were sort of banging on about how if we can stop teenage boys hacking from the UK and the US and other Western countries, then we'll basically solve cybercrime. That's absolute nonsense, because the vast majority of cybercrime comes from foreign countries in places like Russia, Ukraine, places that often don't have very good cooperation with UK law enforcement or Western law enforcement. That's why we have the ransomware ecosystem we do. So yes, you're absolutely right. My book focuses on a very small but significant and potentially growing part of the cybercrime ecosystem, but it is small. And I think that's important to make that point. As you say, there are bigger fish to fry. But I think the thing about teenage cybercrime in the Western world, English-speaking cybercrime, is that, first of all, it's growing, which is a bit worrying. We're seeing some really serious attacks now. Yes. For example, Co-op, M&S, Harrods, where you've got young teenagers, allegedly, teaming up with, cartels, probably Russian-run cybercrime cartels. That's troubling. But also, we can do something about this as well. So we can't really do anything. There's not a lot we can do about these massive, well-run, powerful cybercrime groups making hundreds of millions a year from places like Russia. But we can do something about our own, little Timmy upstairs.
And that's what I wanted to talk about, because it comes on to this sort of the kit of this crime. And I'm always bewildered that BA, when they had the Mage Cart attack, M&S, others, they're all saying these are sophisticated crimes. Now, when I look at if you set aside the sort of deception, social engineering, the human part of it, the bits of kit that help create these false identities, these false phishing landing websites and stuff. As an internet engineer, I've played a lot with pen testing kits that pre-install bits of kits on Linux and stuff that sort of emulate the work of the hacker. These bits of kit, as far as I'm concerned, are things that anybody who is tech savvy, it's easy to use. Now, one of our guests, Kieran Martin, former head of NCSC, and he's a good friend of ours, and he came on the internet seriously, and he talked about the business of ransomware. He had this wonderful term for manufacturing fear and selling relief. Would you agree that these tools used by hackers are essentially clever bits of kit invented by others but distributed by groups such as Scattered Spider? And they're just so easy to use then that kids are using it, and that's why you're seeing you're not seeing these genius kids rising up from the ashes. You're looking at something that anybody can really employ, and it's just down to a sort of moral choice whether or not to become a hacker.
Yeah, I think so. I think that people say the barrier to entry is so low now because of those things, as you say. There are off-the-shelf tools that can be downloaded easily. There are YouTube tutorials for everything. There's manuals that you can buy or
also,
hire.
One of our colleagues was talking about scam as a service. Like, you set up your shop of here are my scam scripts that people can buy.
Yeah, and there's almost and the Scattered Spider group that you refer to in your book, which was very prescient given the Marks and Spencer's alleged perpetrators. But they were described as being a sort of franchisee of the Dragon Force, ransomware as a service toolkit. Yeah, an affiliate marketing thing.
Thank you very much. This is fantastic. It's been great talking to you, Joe. We really welcome the time that you've given us tonight. Before you finally sign off, do we have a comment of the week? No, Ashton Silence. This really is.
I want to just ask one more. Can I?
You can ask one more question because we don't have a comment.
Because I wanted to talk to you about. You mentioned autism quite a bit in the book as a feature of some of the characters, and and the fact that even though there's been a lot of research about what are the links, are there links? Nobody's really sure. And is it about? There's one point where you're speculating, is it about people not knowing right or wrong? And I wanted to sort of challenge that a little bit and say, is it, because I think that, and in the tech industry, there's a lot of autistic people who are working and not necessarily cyber criminals at all, and have a strong sense of right or wrong. And I wondered, thinking about those sort of the swatting, there was episodes that really disturbed me in your book, and it felt to me almost like a sense of lack of proportionality, or a sense of not knowing where to stop. And I wondered whether there's an autism thing going on, or whether that's just the characteristics of some of the individuals that you are talking about. I just wanted your thoughts and your reactions on that question, because it's clearly been in your mind as you're writing it.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is just that's where the evidence went. So I would bring up that someone is autistic just because that's a matter of fact. And I think, I think sort of like towards the end of the book, I talk about, the fact that, hang on a minute, is there something going on here? Is there a trend? And you're right, there hasn't been a solid study that's been done that I have found that says there is a really direct link between being on the autistic spectrum and being a hacker. In fact, some of the evidence points to them more likely, if you're autistic, to have really, really firm set of boundaries, rights and wrongs, as you say. So I don't think there is a link, but certainly anecdotally, it is impossible to ignore the fact that there are lots and lots of individuals who end up going to court, and in trials we hear a lot about people being autistic. And I've been in court cases where both defendants have varying degrees of autism, and well, we're not really meant to talk about it, but the arrests that we recently saw, Scattered Spider, that came up in the press conference. It is a factor, and that adds a whole other layer of complexity to how you handle these individuals, and also how they're handled legally as well.
Yes. Yeah, because there's also, I was very struck reading the reports of the arrests of Scattered Spider, how young the alleged perpetrators are.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I really appreciate the sensitivity around all of this. We have autistic people in our family. I think I'm practically on the spectrum. I think half the programmers here are as well. So I also think there's something you can generalize about a lot of people who are interested in tech, so I just, so very, but thank you for going there, because it's something that needs to be talked about a bit, I think. So, finally, if you've liked what we've been talking about today, please like or follow us. Click the subscribe button, which is coming up in front of Alice right now, and follow us on YouTube, and leave comments, particularly if you've liked what we've talked about, but we can take them if you don't like it as well. But anyway, thank you very much. So we have been talking to Joe Tidy about his fantastic book. What's the book title? Control Chaos. And we've been talking about unpacking victim blame and cruelty in the digital world, addressing the internet's design flaws, and finally unpacking the cybercrime paradox, looking at organised transnational gangs and accessible hacking tools. So, Joe, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us today in our tech channel. It means the world to us. Thank you for returning the favour, and really wish you well. And
giving up your evening, because I know you had other plans this evening. So thank you very much.
And wish you well. Although I don't think we need to with your fantastic book. I think it's going very well. And thank you for giving us the time today.
Thank you.